Islam is not a static faith. It was born in movement, shaped in struggle, and designed for progress. In today's world, where challenges are many and answers often feel outdated, it's time to ask, what went wrong, and how can we reclaim the vitality that once defined the Muslim world?
That's quite an opening, and it really cuts to the heart of the book we're exploring today. It's called Islam in the Contemporary World, A New Narrative, and it's by Zafarullah Khan.
Exactly. And right from the get-go, in the prelude, Khan lays out this central problem. He acknowledges Islam's amazing past, doesn't he? He calls it an excellent and unmatched civilization.
Oh, absolutely. A beacon of light for humanity for almost a millennium, I think he says. But then comes the shift.
Right. He talks about Muslims having slept, fallen into a deep slumber, and, instead of tackling today's issues, the focus became just remembering the good old days.
That phrase he mentions, our father was king, it's vivid. It captures that feeling of relying on past glory, which, as he points out, does absolutely nothing for the present.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. He's quite clear. Past glory does not negate the need for ongoing growth and development. You can't rest on laurels forever.
Mm-hmm. And his main point, right there in the prelude, is that this requires serious introspection. It requires generating fresh ideas. He even says these things are imperative for their survival.
Wow, imperative for survival. He doesn't mince words. And he links this stagnation, this lack of progress to something specific.
He does. He points to a lack of real ijtihad.
Ijtihad, independent reasoning, intellectual effort.
Exactly. He argues that without that dynamic, ongoing intellectual engagement, Muslims haven't been able to create a truly Islamic modern existence, and, well, they're missing out on a peaceful, prosperous life.
So the book itself, he frames it as a kind of response.
Yeah, he calls it a humble endeavor based on, 40 years of study, aimed at building a counter-narrative, especially against using Islam for extremist ends. It's split into two parts, looking at the past and then the present and future.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're really going to focus on how he sets all this up. We'll look closely at the prelude, which we've touched on, and that critical first chapter, the one titled, I Am If I Move.
Right. Because that's where he lays the groundwork, the foundational principles for this whole new narrative he wants to build. It's about understanding his diagnosis and where he thinks the solutions begin.
Let's lean in then. Let's unpack these initial ideas together.
Mhm.
So going back to that prelude idea, this deep slumber, it's a powerful image this community sort of stuck, just saying, our father was king.
It really paints a picture of inertia, doesn't it? And like you said, he stresses that looking backward offers zero solutions for today. It's almost like a defense mechanism that actually prevents progress.
And the language he uses about needing to wake up from this, it's intense. Serious introspection and fresh ideas aren't just nice-to-haves, they're imperative for survival and to avoid the stagnation of a living death.
Stagnation of a living death. I mean, that phrase really tells you how urgently he views the situation. And it brings us back to Ijtihad.
Right. The lack of that independent reasoning, that intellectual struggle, is presented as a core reason for this stagnation. It's what's holding things back, in his view.
Yeah. So the book is his attempt, based on decades of work, to sort of jumpstart that thinking again, to offer an alternative, particularly to extremist views. Part 1 diagnoses the history. Part 2 proposes the way forward.
Which takes us right into chapter 1. I am if I move. This title itself feels really significant.
It is. It sets the tone immediately. This chapter is about the dynamic principles he sees as vital, and fittingly, it kicks off with the concept of movement.
And he uses poetry to capture it, right? There's that couplet.
Yes, it's powerful. The disintegrating riverbank said, "Though long have I lived, alas, I have not discovered who I am. An ecstatic wave rippled past swiftly and said, I am if I move not, I die."
Wow. So the static thing, the riverbank, it loses itself. But the wave, the moving thing, its very being is the movement. Existence equals dynamism.
Exactly. Identity through action, not inertia. He follows that up with another couplet, I think, from Iqbal.
Yes, about a streamlet. How it has to keep flowing, keep putting in effort to eventually become a powerful torrent.
Right. Constant effort, sustained movement. It connects to his idea that freedom isn't just handed to you, it's a reward to be won through that persistent struggle and motion.
This constant movement, this energy, it naturally leads to the next big idea in the chapter, which is struggle.
It does. And here he brings in classical thought, mentioning Ibn Miskawayh.
Ah, right. Ibn Miskawayh, he talked about the struggle for existence on a personal level, but also for communities, for nations.
And Khan then connects this carefully. He adds nuance, but he connects it to Darwin's ideas, struggle for existence, survival of the fittest. But here's where he makes a really crucial turn.
Okay, because survival of the fittest can sound pretty harsh, just about power.
Exactly. But Khan defines fittest very differently. He says survival isn't about being the strongest brute force. He argues that those peoples and religions survive that are beneficial to humanity, have the capability to live and possess the qualities of knowledge, truthfulness, and an urge to serve mankind and dispense justice.
That's quite a different take. So fitness is measured by benefit to humanity, by knowledge, truth, justice, service.
Precisely. It's about positive contribution, not just dominance. And he contrasts this directly. Nations or religions built on brutality, falsehood, and disdain for mankind, he says. They get wiped out by history.
So the struggle is real, but the outcome favors those who contribute positively. That makes sense.
And this whole line of thought movement, struggle defined by positive values, leads into the final section of the chapter, which is titled Of Islam, applying these ideas directly to the faith.
Okay, so how does he connect movement and struggle to Islam itself?
Well, he argues that any living system, including a faith, needs both change and stability. You need roots, but you also need growth, adaptation.
And that growth, that beneficial change, it requires certain things.
Yes, it needs knowledge. And again, that desire to serve humankind. Change for its own sake isn't the goal. It has to be purposeful, guided by ethics and knowledge.
Right. Makes sense.
And he references Arnold Toynbee here.
Ah, the historian. Challenge and response.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Toynbee's theory about how civilizations rise or fall based on how they respond to challenges. And Toynbee highlighted the role of creative minorities within societies, the ones who actually come up with the solutions.
So Khan is implicitly suggesting the Muslim world is facing major challenges now
Yeah.
and needs that kind of creative internal response.
It seems that way. And for Khan, the engine for that creative response, the key tool, goes back to Ijtihad.
Independent reasoning again. He really hammers this point home.
He does, and here he grounds it firmly in Islamic tradition. He brings up that very famous hadith, the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sending Muaz bin Jabal to Yemen as a judge.
Oh, right. I know this one. The Prophet asked him how he'll make decisions.
Exactly. And Muaz says, first the Quran, then the Sunnah, the Prophet's practice. But then he says, if he can't find an answer in either of those.
He says, I shall not fail to make an effort, Ijtihad, to reach an opinion. He'll use his own reasoning, his own effort.
Ijtihad, that's the key word. And crucially, the Prophet's reaction wasn't just acceptance, it was praise. He was pleased, saying something like, praise be to God who guided the messenger to what pleases God's messenger.
So it's an explicit endorsement right from the beginning of using independent judgment when the texts aren't explicit.
Yes, guided by core principles, of course, compassion, justice, honesty, impartiality, equality, as the source mentions. It shows this was foreseen, even encouraged for a practical life. Khan also briefly mentions another hadith about pollinating date trees.
Ah, yeah, where the Prophet basically said, you know more about your worldly affairs, allowing for practical expertise and different opinions.
Right. So Khan pulls these together to argue that the Prophet himself anticipated times when Muslims would need this independent thinking. And the lack of it now, the failure to exercise this ijtihad, is why, in his view, Muslims lag far behind the comity of the nations.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. We have the prelude diagnosing a kind of slumber, stagnation. Then chapter 1 lays out these principles. Movement as essential for existence, struggle is necessary but defined by positive contribution, and Ijtihad, independent reasoning, as the God-approved tool for navigating new challenges.
Exactly. Khan is essentially saying the path to renewal isn't about finding something totally new or foreign. It's about reactivating these inherent dynamic principles, especially Ijtihad, that were part of Islam from its very foundation.
So the new narrative he's proposing is actually rooted in reclaiming something fundamental from the past, but applying it dynamically to the present.
That seems to be the core argument he's building right from the start. It's about unleashing that intellectual and practical dynamism that he sees as essential to the faith.
So wrapping up our look at this initial setup, the prelude in chapter 1 of Zafarullah Khan's book, The Main Thrust, seems pretty clear. There's a diagnosis of stagnation, linked to losing touch with dynamic principles like movement and struggle, and, crucially, abandoning the practice of Ijtihad, independent reasoning.
Right. even though, as he argues, that practice has strong roots in early Islamic tradition. So he's laid out the problem and pointed towards the recovery of these foundational dynamic elements as the starting point for any kind of revitalization.
It's definitely just the beginning of his argument, the foundation for this new narrative.
It sets the stage for the rest of the book.
And it really leaves you with something to think about. If, as Khan argues, movement and struggle are vital for life, and if intellectual inertia is a major problem, what kind of personal movement or maybe struggle might be necessary for you, for any of us, to engage more deeply with knowledge, to grapple with tough questions, and really respond to the complexities of today's world? What stands out to you from hearing about these ideas?
That's a really potent question to reflect on after this discussion.
Well, thank you for joining us for this first deep dive into Islam and the contemporary world, a new narrative.